The opening part of Crime and Punishment portrays the inner conflict of Raskolnikov. He is torn between his intention to commit a heinous murder and the resistance of his conscience against taking a human life. He's been thinking about committing this murder for 6 weeks. And as the book begins, he is on his way for a trial run. He is going to sell something to the rapacious pawnbroker that he intends to kill. Raskolnikov is a sensitive young man. He experiences impulses of compassion at the suffering of those he sees on the way to the pawnbroker's house. Raskolnikov is repulsed by his own intention. And let us think about Raskolnikov's character and situation. He is indebted. He has isolated himself from all the other people he knew. Raskolnikov is not thinking of the murder for materialistic gain. The narrator can penetrate his mind. And for Raskolnikov, at first, the murder is almost just something to do, a way to take action in a world hostile to action. He says, "What are most people afraid of? A new step, their own word? That's what they're most afraid of. I babble too much. However, that's why I don't do anything, because I babble. However, maybe it's like this. I babble because I don't do anything." His inaction loosens the strings of his soul and his will. Or is it his loss of will that causes his inaction? Either way, to show that he is significant in the world, he wants to commit a great deed. And he goes and visits the pawnbroker, trying to borrow money on some items. And he stands before his future victim. He feels boundless loathing, and he is oppressed and sick in his heart. His head spins, and he almost loses the ability to stand up straight. But he does come to his senses, as the narrator constantly has in refrain. Comes to his senses. That's like the prodigal son, who is in the pig pen eating slop. The struggle of the central attribute of Raskolnikov's character is about coming to his senses. He longs for a certain greatness, but he is paralyzed. He leaves the pawnbroker and he walks home. On his way home, he traipses through the squalor of Petersburg, and he meets a drunkard named Marmeladov, who gives a long, meandering speech about his own wretched condition. When I first read the novel, I did not really understand why this long speech was present right at the beginning of the book. Section 2, Part 1. I now want to hazard a guess as to why it is there. Marmeladov's speech is filled with self-pity, guilt, and an account of his own misery. Marmeladov freely quotes from Scripture. He envisions Christ returning to earth, and he asks for pardon for the children of shame like himself. Marmeladov contrasts Christ's all-forgiving love with the wise ones and those of understanding. Marmeladov contrasts the new ideas of his day, which forbid the practice of compassion because it is inconsistent with the idea of political economy, where all look after their interests. Compassion versus political economy. It's an old contrast. Man is wretched, poor, in debt, a sensualist, and exploits other people. Marmeladov has 3 children and a wife, but is unable to take care of them. All of this makes him resemble, at least, Raskolnikov. But Marmeladov also feels guilty about his condition. He is ashamed. He even seeks a kind of forgiveness. Let's take stock. Both Marmeladov and Raskolnikov are unhappy, but they point to 2 very different understandings of the origins of unhappiness. Marmeladov's understanding is mostly Christian. Raskolnikov's understanding is mostly modern and individualistic. Marmeladov is torn by affairs of the heart, by the treatment of Sonia, the daughter of his first marriage, who has sacrificed her body to make sure that the children of his second marriage can eat. He spins a sad story. He earns money for his family, but then spends it on debauchery, and then regrets it. In response to all this, Raskolnikov does two things. First, he leaves Marmeladov coins so that his daughter need not sell her body. But then he immediately regrets it, and he sees all of Marmeladov's concerns as mere prejudice, instilled fear. Raskolnikov asserts that there are no barriers, and that's just how it should be. This is all typical of Dostoevsky. He puts the Christian view on the lips of a despicable drunkard. Who could take that guy seriously? He's a bad man. He is weak-willed. And then Dostoevsky contrasts that Christian man to the modern man, who has been listening to this mind-numbing speech. And these two views end up being tips of two very different icebergs. One is the moral universe of conscience, though it is unfavorably portrayed here. The other is the moral universe of human willfulness that sees conscience as an instilled prejudice. It seems almost reasonable in contrast to the drunk. The Christian wants to bring judgment on himself. The modern wants to be the judge and maker of the world. The Christian indeed looks ridiculous from the standpoint of the person who would make the world and assert his will. And Dostoevsky basically takes that point of view when describing the Christian with Marmeladov as his mouthpiece. Ultimately, however, it is that family, Marmeladov's family, that provides the lodestar for Raskolnikov's resurrection. But we will see that later on. After listening to Marmeladov's speech, Raskolnikov returns to his despicable apartment. After a sleepless night, a letter arrives from his mother announcing that his sister in the provinces, Dunya, is engaged to be married to a man named Luzhin. The story of this engagement introduces two additional men into the story. One man who is kind of old world, and one who is a new man. So this repeats the same Christian backdrop. According to the mother's letter, Dunya, the sister, had been working as a governess for a family in a neighboring town. The father from this family, an important character who will come up much again later, was named Svidrigailov. He took a shine to Dunya. He propositioned her. Svidrigailov's wife heard the proposition and blamed the girl. And she spread nasty rumors about Dunya's character around town. Eventually, this wife recognized her error, and when she did, she went straight to the cathedral, knelt down, and prayed in tears to our sovereign lady for the strength to endure this new trial and fulfill her duty. She confessed her gossiping to the town and did everything she could to restore Dunya's reputation. We will learn a bit more about Svidrigailov later on. When her reputation was restored, Dunya was introduced to a certain court counselor, Luzhin. He is described as a man of affairs, trustworthy and established, perhaps a bit sullen and arrogant. He shares, as he says himself, the convictions of our newest generations and is the enemy of all prejudices. It is clear that this man wants to keep Dunya in a position of subordination. He has chosen her precisely because he is high and she is low, and therefore she is more likely to feel loyalty and gratitude toward the man who stooped down to pick her up. Luzhin is a modern man, incapable of love and capable only of calculation, and his calculating makes love impossible. And that generally is the juxtaposition in this first part of the book and in the whole book. On one hand, we have great acts of love. Raskolnikov's mother is concerned about his soul. Raskolnikov himself is concerned about the condition of Marmeladov and his family, and he leaves some coins to them. Dunya, Raskolnikov's sister, is concerned about Raskolnikov and wants to make sure that she is not a drain on him, so she will marry Luzhin. Sonya, the daughter of Marmeladov, sacrifices herself for her stepbrothers and sisters. These acts of love are the ground of community, though they are dishonored. On the other hand, we have acts of non-love, a variety of them. Consider just a few from part 1. Raskolnikov has a dream where he remembers the owner of a donkey sadistically beating it to death, simply because he could. Luzhin, that modern fiancé of Dunya, is all calculation and no eros or love. And then, of course, we have Raskolnikov, who seems capable of love, but is also trying to get beyond it. He is planning this terrific crime partly as a way of showing that he is beyond good and evil. So it is best to see the book as a whole, as a battle for the soul of Raskolnikov. He certainly commits the crime, as we will see in the next video. He certainly feels bad about it, as we will see over the course of time. He is capable of love, and he is capable of cold-hearted murder. Some characters fall on one side of this divide, while others fall on the other. Or perhaps I should put that as a question. Is it possible to live life on the side of the cold-hearted? What does that side of the cold-hearted look like? The cold-hearted is the modern. Can the modern be reconciled with love? Is it possible to live a good life without active love? Raskolnikov is a species of test case for this, and we will have to see how the experiment runs. Next time, we look at the murder that ends part 1.